Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from around the world. And welcome to this afternoon's London Business School webinar on what derails the careers of high flyers and what you can do about it. Quick word of introduction. My name is Brett Hunter. I'm the Director of Recruitment Admissions for Leadership Programs here at London Business School. But far more importantly, I'm joined today by Richard Jolly, who is an adjunct professor at London Business School, who will be talking us through his thoughts on this topic. I'll leave Rich to introduce him in a second, but just a quick run through of the ground rules before then. We'll be around for about an hour. Most of that will obviously be taken up by Richard's session. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to use the Q&A function to let us know what your questions are, and we'll try to answer those as we go through. But again, also, if you want to use the chat function just to kind of share your thoughts, your ideas, and anything that's going on in your mind as we go through this particular session. I'll be around through to the end to help with some questions as well. But in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Richard.
Thanks so much, Brett, and welcome to the session. And it's an absolute privilege being with you here. This is one of my funnest things to do, is these information sessions. And because I was in your position a few years ago now, I have to admit. So I remember going to an information session at London Business School, almost 25 years ago, I have to admit, and sitting there. I remember the lecture theatre, I remember the professor, the wonderful John Hunt, and I was so inspired. I then applied to London Business School, did the Executive MBA, and I then was enjoying the MBA so much. I remember sitting there thinking, I want to do that job. And so I stayed on and worked my way onto the faculty. And I've been a professor at London Business School for 22 years since then. So this is an institution that is very close to my heart. And what I want to do today is share with you one of these sessions that I've taught on the MBA. And it's a session that I hope will have some relevance to you. And we're going to make this interactive. And when we've got this webinar format, we need to, there's a sort of challenge to make it interactive. And we're going to use the chat function in order to do that. So what we're going to do to kick off with, so you need to get ready to type, because I'm going to ask you for your opinion on a couple of questions. So where I want you to start here is I want you to think back to the absolute best boss you have ever had. And the question to you is, so it could be your current boss, it could be a boss you had years ago. And the question to you is, what did he or she do that made it such a good experience for you? So just have a pause and a think about it. And then I want you to type in your answers into the chat function. And by the way, when I say behaviors that made it a good experience, please don't write things like inspiring or motivating. Because those are outcomes, those aren't behaviors. What I want to know here is, what were the actual behaviors that made them so inspiring or so motivating for you? So I'll just pause for a minute and give you a chance to write into the chat. Let me see who are the fast typers here. Sumit and Abby win the prize, the fastest typers, but I'll just give you a little bit longer just so we can get some more responses. Emerson, very good, very good. Sense of humor is maybe one aspect of the best bosses. So I'll just give you another sort of few seconds to respond. Okay, so please carry on typing if you're still typing or reflecting on this. But let's just pick up on this. So transparent communication. This is a particularly current theme right now because the issue of communication is so fundamental. Because if you go to any management team of any company anywhere in the world and say, do you have a vision and strategy? They always say yes. Second question, have you communicated to your people? What do they say? Well, they always say yes. But then if you go and talk to the employees and say, do you understand the vision and strategy? What do they typically say? Well, no. In fact, one analysis of this by Kaplan and Norton found that 95% of employees are unaware of or do not understand the company strategy. 95%. And that was before the pandemic. And certainly with organizations I'm consulting with right now, this is very much the issue that is so linked to the Great Resignation, which is, do we really feel we're getting effective communication? And increasingly, this issue of transparent communication gets talked about again and again. We're going to come back to it in a minute. Authenticity is a word that Abby raises here. And this is a key aspect of what the way we teach leadership at the school. And authenticity is, I think, for me, a very sophisticated, complex topic. Because you might say, well, just be yourself. And that seems like pretty good advice. But is it good advice? As one of my, a colleague of mine in the US put it, basically, you're being successful if there are 4 or 5 people in the world who actually know you well and still want to have a relationship with you. So authenticity is complicated, and it also involves not just being yourself, which is a very bad idea, but being yourself skillfully. And so thinking about my professional identity is something that we talk about a lot. So one of the courses I teach at LBS called Interpersonal Dynamics is all about who am I and how do I build effective relationships. And so being skillfully authentic is particularly problematic because it involves another element of this, which is vulnerability. And that's my point about the 4 or 5 people there. You're making yourself vulnerable. Honesty comes back to transparent communication. And I think the one thing I would say about honesty is clearly this is a good thing, but it's, again, slightly more complicated than we might think. Because if we look at it through the lens of moral philosophy, are we honest all the time? No. In our personal lives, are we honest all the time? Well, surely lying is a bad thing. But I have 2 daughters who are 12 and 14. And to be honest, I lie to them pretty much constantly. There were many, many years when we lied about, did Father Christmas exist? Is there such thing as a tooth fairy, an Easter bunny? All these sort of things, lying constantly. And when you're really senior, you kind of have to lie. So honesty is absolutely critical. And being more honest links back to our transparent communication. But there is a joke where there's a couple lying in bed and one partner turns to the other and says, darling, what are you thinking? To which the answer is, if I wanted you to know, I would be speaking, not thinking. So honesty here, if you are in a long-term relationship right now and you are honest with your partner the whole time, you would no longer have a relationship. If your partner was honest with you all of the time, you would no longer have a relationship, particularly given we're hopefully finally emerging from this pandemic state and certainly from lockdown. And if you've been locked down with another person, then you might resonate with what Sigmund Freud talked about when he said, as an analogy for relationships, we are like porcupines. The closer we get to somebody, the more we spike each other with our quills. And so honesty is absolutely critical, I agree. But again, it needs to be done skillfully, as with authenticity, and it is something that needs to be done should we say, sensitively there, because it can be rather a brutal and blunt instrument. And challenge, Abby's third point there. I want to pick up on that because it's a really fascinating point. This is an exercise I have literally done hundreds of times with groups, MBA groups and executive groups all around the world for the last 22 years. The point about challenge is one I think is perhaps slightly surprising in a way, because the best bosses we ever had at the time, we may have actually complained about them. In fact, we may have been complaining like hell. My boss is being so tough on me. They're pushing me so hard. Sometimes it's only with hindsight we realize that the reason they were pushing us so hard and really challenging us is they could see things in us that perhaps we hadn't even seen in ourselves. They were really sort of thinking, look, I know you've got more to give, and really pushing us to deliver more. And so when you read the biographies of famous leaders, which obviously professionally I've had to do quite a lot of over the years, what you find is very often, not always, but very often, these very brilliant leaders were going along, having a successful career, but then they had a really important mentor figure in their life who pushed them very hard. And that's when they really stepped up to a new level. So some great points there. Dominique, being human, and I think this point about being human is particularly challenging in a hybrid world, because I used to do these lectures face to face in a lecture theatre at LBS. And here we are in our virtual, live virtual format here. And it makes this whole human interaction so more challenging. And again, I touched on this issue of the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation, why are so many people leaving their organizations in so many parts of the world? It's not just a UK, European, or American concept. Why are they leaving? Well, what the research shows is it's basically not for money. Occasionally people are upgrading and getting more money, particularly at, should we say, sort of unskilled, semi-skilled jobs. But for you guys, no. The reason people are leaving is that they don't feel that they are really growing and developing. They don't feel as if they're learning from the people above them. They don't feel part of a community. And so this whole thing about being human, it's something that I would argue that the pandemic is really accelerating a fundamental shift that's been happening certainly for the last 15, 20 years. This is a fundamental challenge to what it means to be an effective senior manager. I'm going to say a little bit more about this in a bit, but certainly being human and feeling we have this sort of connection with our boss and that they're approachable. And some bosses say, my door is always open. The question is, are people walking through it? You'll know you're approachable if people are walking through it, rather than just saying that you do that. So thank you, Dominique. Cynthia, honest feedback. And again, on this course, Interpersonal Dynamics, this feedback is an absolutely critical part of it. And I want to talk a bit about feedback because feedback is an example of what we call good pain. So this is an interesting concept, good pain. What do we mean by good pain? Well, good pain, we know what bad pain is. Good pain is anything that if you do it repeatedly, even though it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, it's painful, you grow, you develop your capabilities, you get stronger. And feedback for me is an example of good pain. And I would argue that feedback is a gift. It may not be the gift you wanted, but it may well be the gift that you need. So feedback, absolutely crucial. Again, challenging, coming up again, and entrepreneurial. So this thing of being entrepreneurial, it's fascinating. When I did my MBA years ago now, this wasn't so much of an issue, but it's something that I would argue LBS is very, very strong at, is helping our MBA students, and particularly our members, really think about what success looks like for me in my career. And so, you know, a large number of our students now are getting tooled up to go off and actually start off their own ventures and be their own bosses. This is something that I think is a great ambition. But having a boss who's entrepreneurial, who really is hungry and open and has that what I call fire in their eyes, is for me a key part of what it means to be entrepreneurial. So thanks for that, Cynthia. Then Kaidi encouraged me for the good job done and gave me a raise. Now, encouraging me for the good job done and give me a raise. These are both forms of recognition. And money, we're not going to talk too much about money. Money matters. I am here being unpaid, in fact, but money matters to all of us, and that's fine. And many of you clearly will want to come to LBS because at the end of LBS, then you will almost certainly be able to command a higher salary. In fact, statistically, investing in an MBA at a world-class business school is one of the most economically guaranteed, not completely, but one of the most economically guaranteed investments you can make in yourself. So getting more money, obviously paying off some MBA debts in the short term is important, but in the long run here, doing an MBA is something that will put you almost certainly on a different trajectory in terms of the future earning capabilities. So all of us are motivated by money, and more money is good. The question is, how much money do we need to be happy? And we'll be talking about money in more detail, of course, in one of your core courses, what my department's called Organizational Behavior. And our core OB course talks about money. And this is important. And how much money do we need to be happy? Well, the simple answer is whoever you talk to, they say, basically, if I had twice as much money as I have now, then I'd be happy. But it's not so much absolute as a relative issue. So money is important, but here's the thing about recognition. Saying thank you, saying I appreciate you, showing that recognition, showing gratitude. There's a whole bunch of research. In fact, a colleague of mine, Dan Cable, who has a very cool elective in the school as well, has just written a book about gratitude, and it's one of the key elements of what we call positive psychology, which I would argue is one of the biggest revolutions in our understanding of what it means to be an effective boss and what drives effective organizations in the last 45 years. And so in sort of my world, this sort of business psychology world, this is absolutely fundamental because the reality of it is saying, thank you, I appreciate you, can actually be more motivating than actually giving people a raise. So it's a longer conversation, Kaidi, but it's a great point. So there is that incentive and recognition point. Alvin talks about being honest again and constructive feedback. Being humble, Cameron, is a great one. So Jim Collins, a very respected academic, wrote a wonderful book called From Good to Great, which some of you may have bought and put on your shelf. You may even have read the first chapter. It was certainly the best-selling business book about 15 years ago. And in it, he says, look, there are different levels of leadership. And the top level is what he calls level 5 leaders. And these are the ones who create consistently higher levels of profitability than lower levels of leaders, and very much in a sustainable way. And he says they have two characteristics. The first one is that determination, that entrepreneurial point, you might say, the fire in their eyes, what we call professional will. The other aspect is humility. Now, I teach another course called Paths to Power, which talks about power and politics in organizations. And in that course, one of the sessions I teach is about the dark side of power. And the reality here is many senior executives are not humble. They are what we call narcissistic. And narcissistic is this grandiose sense of self, best summed up by a colleague of mine who describes it. He's one of the world's authority on narcissism. He says, narcissism is basically saying to yourself, if I ruled the world, it would be a much better place. So humility is rare, but those leaders who genuinely have humility will almost certainly be more productive in a sustainable way than the more grandiose ones, and certainly more stable. Curious, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful word, Cameron, there, and a very, very thoughtful word. It links back to entrepreneurs who typically are one of the key drivers there is curiosity, but for all of us, thinking about how we could do things differently is crucially important. In fact, There's one of my heroes was a guy called Kurt von Hammerstein-Eckward, and he was in charge of the German army in the early part of the 20th century, and still revered as one of the great military leaders today. And when he was selecting officers, he wanted to know two things about them. Number one was how smart they were, and number two was how hardworking they were. And if they were stupid and lazy, then they were not officer material, frontline troops with a short life expectancy. If they were not so smart, but they were very hardworking, then there's clearly some roles that they can usefully use. But this is where it gets interesting. He said the smart, hardworking ones are dangerous. He wanted smart, lazy people because those are the ones that are curious and creative about, look, why do we have to do all this work? Surely we could just do this instead. So I think curiosity is important. Caring, particularly during the lockdown, I think the issue of caring has never been a more important issue. And one of the things that is, I think, going to emerge as a long-term legacy of the pandemic is a mental health crisis, both amongst children. And again, we won't dwell on that. That's not the focus for today. But that is, as a parent myself, is the trends there absolutely shockingly disturbing, but amongst executives. And so I believe that this is more important than ever, particularly if we're going to retain our employees during the time of the Great Resignation. Authentic, we talked about, and decisive is a great point. Emerson, so thank you. Motivating, inspiring. Wonderful. Nicholas, reward. We've talked about reward, both recognition and money, accepting first-time mistakes. And that's beautifully put, Nicholas. And I like that, first-time mistakes. It's not about saying, oh, never mind, you screwed up again. Maybe one day you'll get it right. Clearly, that's not a good way of being. But as the saying goes, failure is a better teacher than success. And so learning through our mistakes and having that space to do that is crucial. Being inclusive and trusting. And I want to pick up on this word trust, Sri, because I think that's an incredibly powerful concept. In fact, I would argue that trust is the foundation stone in many ways on which all of these other brilliant points you've raised are built. And there was a study published in 1979 by a professor called Rosenthal. And what he did is he went into a series of primary schools and he gave the children a test, which was predicting their future academic performance. And so what he did, he went to the teachers and said, look, I put the children in your class into two categories. The first category are the high potential children. These ones are going to sort of step up. And the second category are the low potential children, but don't share this with the kids. He then went away, but he came back 3 or 4 months later, unexpectedly, to see how the children were getting on. And what he found was remarkable, because in every single school, the high potential children that they'd been labeled high potential were doing well, and the low potential children were doing less well, which is, as a social scientist, you're trying to be able to accurately predict future behavior. So that's kind of cool. The problem is he lied to the teachers. The children had been randomly assigned to one group or the other, and yet their measurable behavior in every single class, in every single school, was showing a clear divergence. But he'd lied to the teachers. So the only thing that could be actually affecting their performance was the attitude, the mindset of the teacher. If a teacher thinks a child is stupid, lazy, and incompetent, they will be right. But if a teacher believes a child is smart and capable and is going to do well, they are also likely to be right. One way or the other, the attitude of the authority figure creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Trust has to be given, not earned. Because there are some bosses, we'll talk about them in a minute, who say, well, I'm skeptical, I am cynical, you have to earn my trust. And look, the idiot screwed up again. But again, they are creating a particular context, which brings us neatly on to the second half of this exercise. And some of you may be able to guess where we're going with this. I want you to think of the worst boss you have ever had. The question is, what did they do that made it a difficult experience for you? Now, you could say, Richard, It's the opposite of all of these things in this first list, but that would be lazy thinking, not worthy of an MBA student at London Business School. So what I want to do, again in the group chat, is just type down the worst experiences you've ever had and a boss. It may be your current boss, as I say, maybe years ago. What did they do that made it such a difficult experience for you? So I'll just give you a minute to type these in. My experience is that most people find it fairly easy to answer this, as we seem to be seeing here. I did once have an MBA student who said, Richard, I've never had a bad boss. That's one student in 22 years. So most of us have had some experiences here. Oh, goodness. These are coming in fast and thick. So let me start reading these out. We're going to go through this more quickly because otherwise it's a bit depressing. Lack of engagement. Telling me I'm wrong and not listening, false promises. Ooh, Abby, absolutely. Win pretended to create a career progression plan and did not follow up on his plan as they had a hidden agenda. Very good. Extremely transactional. Summit. Yeah, and that's. I'm sure there's some, should we say, some color behind that, but I think we know what you mean. Micromanaging. I believed his company is perfect, but it is really not. I've yet to meet the perfect company. Absolutely. In fact, I have a list, certainly in my head, of the most dysfunctional companies I've ever consulted with. And there's quite a few companies on that list. Bullying, of course, and being political in the negative sense of the word. Absolutely. The hidden agenda, as Win was talking about it. Paranoid, bullying again, not appreciative, lack of vision, poor communication of the vision. Absolutely. Goes back to our communication point there, Cynthia. Refuse to listen and think herself as the most important and brilliant. Sounds like there might be a little bit of narcissism there in that boss of yours, Katie. Diminish, belittling. Absolutely. There seems to be a bit of a theme there. Another theme here about extreme micromanager. I spent 1 hour every morning, 1 hour every evening reviewing the task I had to do completed. And I was given a percentage score which determined when I could leave the office. Quite funny looking back. Well, I admire, Dominique, your sense of humor about this, because as you described that, I can feel the energy draining from my body just at the thought of having someone do that to me. So when thinks that a good employee automatically makes a good boss or manager, very good. Low levels of psychological safety, Cameron. Now, psychological safety, as you are clearly aware, is one of the phrases we talk about a lot in the business school world these days, because what you find, and there was a wonderful project at Google called Project Aristotle, where they, being a very data-driven analytical organization, they wanted to really review all the project teams that had been set up since Google was founded. And given the data that they had very clear metrics about which project teams had succeeded and which had been less successful. And they were looking to find the characteristics of the most successful project teams. And what they found was, it took them a while to figure it out because a lot of the classic team theory didn't work. But eventually they figured there were 2 key characteristics of the high-performing teams here. First of them is everyone in the team had a voice. There were no passengers. And the second was this sense of psychological safety. If I speak up, is it safe for me to do so? So psychological safety is absolutely critical. And if you go, hey, I think we should be doing things differently, do they support and reward that? Or is that what we call a CLM, or a career limiting move? And as you say, driven by lack of trust, blame culture, and unclear objectives, narcissistic abuse, absolutely Win. Again, my elective on Pastor Power has a whole bunch of advice about how to deal with narcissistic bosses and narcissistic employees as well. You may have that. Jason, mental abusing and not willing to instruct. This is our group therapy moment here, where we share our pain and can certainly not feel that we are the only ones who've had these bosses. In fact, there's a colleague of mine at Wharton called Bob Sutton, who wrote a book called About These Abusive Bosses. And in his research, he found that if you have an abusive boss, you think they're indispensable, but they're not. And in fact, he said his research showed that you're better off firing than keeping them there, even though you think they're indispensable. And the book is called The No Asshole Rule, which I think is a technical term, but I think describes it very well. One more that's gold from Dominique. On business trips, they would knock on my door in their dressing gown, crying and asking me to drink wine with them. I have to say, when I read the first half of that, I wasn't quite sure what they'd ask me for. And clearly, inappropriate behavior has many, many sort of nasty dimensions. But that sounds particularly tedious, Dominique. Discrimination against free is a topic we cover off a lot. And there's many, many forms of discrimination. Discrimination clearly is when you differentiate people based on something that is not fundamental to their ability to do the job. And I have to say, I'm very proud of the fact that at LBS, we have got some of the finest researchers on gender and diversity in the world. In fact, there's a very, very cool course, second-year elective course about this, run by a colleague of mine, Anitha Ratan, which is an absolutely fantastic course. So all of this is terrible. So thank you for sharing your points of view there. This is an exercise, as I said, I've done many times. And guess what? There are some very typical themes here, and some of these may sound consistent here. Oh, we've got another one from Win here. Unfortunately, the company HR takes these behaviors for granted as long as management achieves the company's objectives. Yeah, that is not the first time, and certain industries that is more common than not. And that may be why it's a good idea to do an MBA win. Which is perhaps it might be time to think about, is this a healthy environment to be in? And if I really want to step up my career and get to a slightly less dysfunctional environment, as well as obviously earn more money, then maybe an MBA could be do it. And certainly, if I speak from experience, for me, the MBA was a transformational experience. I will come back to this question, Abby, a bit later. But let me tell you the typical theme. So on the positive side, there was this ambition. They had this big picture, this vision. Why are we here? They were decisive. They were passionate. In terms of their attitude, they gave trust unconditionally. They led by example and showed respect and fairness. In terms of their interaction, they gave responsibility. They gave space to learn. They coached people, and they listened and provided feedback. So those are the best bosses. What about the worst bosses? Well, the worst bosses had no ambition. They were reactive, they were impulsive, they were not open to new ideas, unclear expectations. Their attitude was unpredictable. You never knew where you stood, blaming and defensive, political with that hidden agenda. In terms of their interaction with you, the worst bosses, as many of you are saying, are the micromanagers with no effective communication, highly critical. It's what we call rule by fear. You may have come across JFDI. Which loosely translates as just do it. You can figure out the F in there. And fundamentally, this point about caring, which I think is a really sort of absolutely critical part of what it means to be a good boss, is something that really comes out. So as you look at these two lists, my assumption is that, by the way, my 12-year-old here is wanting to come and say hello. So this is Stella. And Stella is, should we say, an extrovert and loves to come and say hello when I'm giving a lecture. So this is my little monkey. So I better go back to my lecture. Okay, see you, monkey. As you look at these two lists, my question to you is, when you're being managed by the good boss, I assume you enjoyed it more than when you're being managed by the bad boss. But more fundamentally, when you're being managed by the good boss, my assumption is that you were more productive than when you're being managed by the bad boss. So this is not about being nice. It's not about doing the right thing. This is fundamentally linked to productivity. This matters. And studies would suggest, by Bob Sutton and others, that about 60% of bosses are on the right-hand side of this list. And so this, at its essence, is not really an exercise about your experience of others. At its essence, this is an exercise to get you to reflect on you as you look at these two lists. Where are you as a boss? Let me answer this for you. Most of the time, I am a good boss. I can do all of these green behaviors on the left here, but there are times, particularly when I'm under a lot of pressure, which may have been a feature in the last couple of years, when I go over to the dark side. So my question to you is, what turns you to the dark side? Because all of us have a dark side. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. We all have a dark side. And this is something that we need to understand about ourselves. So there's three questions here to really get you to reflect on. What one good boss behavior do you need to do more of? What one really turns you to the dark side? Because all of us have our key trigger points, the things that when they're not there, things when they happen, they're really sort of vulnerable spots there that sort of really trigger this, what we call emotional hijacking, and send us to the dark side. And then what one bad boss behavior do we need to do less of? Because this gets at this issue of derailment. So there are some very predictable mistakes that can lead us to derail in our career. So if you are back in the office now and they've done this to your chair, that's usually a bit of a sign the wheels might have come off your career. And so what I want to do for the second half of our session here is really consider this issue. What are the predictable mistakes that can lead us to derail? Because we're not here looking at bad bosses, we're looking at good bosses with a track record of success. But somehow something goes wrong, that they may not get fired. They may just hit a bit of a ceiling. So what are these predictable mistakes that can lead us to derail? Well, I'm going to carry on with this, Abby, because I want to say there's a few things I want to share with you, and then we can go back to some questions. Because let's look at a career at three key levels. The first time you were ever asked to supervise the performance of others. This is typically because you know stuff and they say, look, you know how to do this, supervise these people. At this point, you quickly learn an important truth. People are a problem. What's wrong with them? It's obvious what the answer is, and yet they keep doing the opposite. So if you've ever had that experience, welcome to a very profound concept called the curse of knowledge, which says that when we know something, it becomes almost impossible to imagine not knowing it. So if you've ever been driving around the road and you come up behind a learner driver and you find yourself getting irritated, you may be familiar with this concept, because is this a rational response? Well, I'll answer this for you. No. The whole point about learner drivers, and wait for this, they don't know how to drive. It might literally be their first time behind the wheel, and yet they have these idiots behind them tooting their horn and getting irritated with them. It's not very rational, but it's very human. So if we're able to overcome this and able to actually help people who don't understand stuff, learn to understand it, then we can rise to middle management. And at middle management, the challenge is completely different, because here we have to manage people who actually know more about their job than you do. So at this stage, you can no longer rely on your technical expertise for your authority. And yet it's that technical expertise that got you into management in the first place, but it's no longer enough. And so the second most reprinted article in the history of the Harvard Business Review was published in the 70s by Bill Onken, and it's called Who's Got the Monkey? There's a very simple metaphor here. If you have a problem, you have a monkey on your back. And our first instinct when we have a monkey on our back is to go to the authority figure, the parent, the teacher, the boss, and say, can you help? And when someone comes to you with a problem and you go, oh, I've done this 100 times, it's going to be quicker for me to do it than even start explaining to you how you might want to do it. So you just say, leave it with me. And the employee goes away and says, boss, you're the best. And you know it's been done well. You've got a happy employee. The world is a beautiful place. But the problem is another employee comes to you with a monkey on their back. And Onken actually produced a video to go with this, which is obviously very out of date these days. I can't show it to you. But he had these actors and these trained monkeys, and literally the employee came into the boss's office with a monkey on his back and said, boss says, leave it with me. And the monkey jumps across to the boss's shoulders. And then this happens again. And before long, the office is full of monkeys and it is chaos. The monkeys are eating the pencils, ripping up the paper. The whole point about Onken's metaphor is if you have a monkey on your back, if your employee has a monkey on their back, when they arrive, they need to leave with a monkey on the back. In fact, sometimes they need to leave with 2 monkeys on the back, because some middle managers, the most consistent derailment issue is they are the hero who has to solve every problem because everyone below me is not as competent as I am. But when you get to the C-suite, the job is completely different. And again, the reason for derailment is completely different. And my course on Paths to Power is helping you understand how to get to the top, which is critical, and how to be effective when you're there. Because when you're seeing it, you don't do anything. And in your time at LBS, you're going to study a whole bunch of stuff around finance and accounting and all of the technical aspects, of course, of being effective in your career. But here's the thing. You need to know this, but very quickly after your MBA, you're not going to be doing spreadsheets. For almost all of you, you're going to be delegating that to other people. You are not going to be doing very much. You're going to be making decisions, particularly when we don't know what the answer is. And so we live in VUCA times. And I first came across this 11 years ago, and I've been teaching it ever since. Today, you may have come across this already. I don't really have to explain it in the way I've had to do for the last, well, certainly the last 9 years, because VUCA is a cluster of interrelated concepts. The V stands for volatility, because the speed of change is not something we need to linger on. The U stands for uncertainty, because there are so many unpredictable things in the world today. C is for complexity, all of the complex internal forces and external forces as well. And the A stands for ambiguity. And this is in the military what they call the fog of war, because even with our latest military technology, we just don't know what's going on in real time in the theater of war. And so this, if we bring it back to a business context, relates to great organizations and successful careers. Because it used to be the case, you started your career at the bottom of the mountain and it was foggy. And you would keep your head down, try and avoid making too many mistakes, getting hit by rocks, and slowly climb your way up the mountainside. And eventually you would emerge into the sunlight and you would be part of the senior team, and you would be setting the vision and cascading it down the mountainside. But this is not how careers work today. A colleague did some studies on this about 5 years ago, and what CEOs were saying then, and it's only accelerated since then, is very different to what they used to say, which is basically, I don't know what the strategy should be. It's foggy at the top of the mountain. And that ability to stay with complexity, rather than have this fantasy that somehow, the clouds will part when you get senior, is a critical aspect of being an effective senior executive. As the American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald put it, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed in the ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. This is such a critical skill, to be able to stay with foggy complexity. And yet some of us have a disease that makes this impossible. Now, this is not the disease that's sweeping through the world today. Well, it is, but it's not the one you're thinking of. This is a disease that I call hurry sickness. Let me list you out some of the typical symptoms of this disease. The question to you is, do any of these sound familiar from your experience? Number one, if you're microwaving something just for 30 seconds, you have to do something else whilst you're waiting for the microwave to go ping. You get a buzz from just catching a plane or a train. You do something else whilst you drive, be on the phone, listen to music, eat your breakfast, drink your coffee, but multitasking behind the wheel. You are a master of airport management. Which queue should I go in? Oh, I should have gone in that line. I could have got there 30 seconds earlier. How you pack, what you wear. You eat at your desk whilst checking your emails, sometimes on the phone at the same time. You do something else whilst brushing your teeth, particularly those of you with an electric toothbrush. You get impatient waiting in line or waiting in traffic. You check your mobile phone multiple times an hour. You hate the time it takes to boot up your computer. In fact, you hate it so much, you never really turn it off. You have sleep mode or hibernate mode. And you find yourself wanting to interrupt other people frequently. Now, you may be polite enough, you don't, but you're still sitting there thinking, come on, get to the point. Now, this one, I know none of you would stoop so low, but you arrive late for Zoom calls and then spend your time doing something unrelated. I know this is not something that you've ever done, and definitely none of you are doing it right now, but statistically, at any point in time, one study found that 30% of people are multitasking during the Zoom meeting. And I'm sure none of you have been doing this in today's session. But what are we doing? Well, here's a list of some of the things we're doing most often. And maybe there's a little bit of this going on. But there's an ultimate symptom to know if you have this disease, which is this. When you get into an elevator, you have a favorite button, and there are 2 words on it often that say closed door, and you know how technology works. You don't just push that button, Richard, once. No, no, no. You got to keep pushing the damn thing, because that's going to make a difference. So just in the chat, just share with me whether you recognize any of these symptoms in yourself. Because this, I would argue, is a very profound issue. Because some of you may be so sick, you're genuinely sitting there thinking, Richard, what's the problem? I'm busy. You just don't get it. You have no idea how busy I am. In fact, it's kind of my job. Well, some people just don't see this as a problem. And if you're that sick, then let me help you. And 85%, Cynthia, clearly, you're probably not alone about that, along with Abby and many others who are probably multitasking so much here they can't even sort of respond in the group chat. There's a few problems with hurry sickness. The first one specifically relates to this door close button and this rather irritating GIF that I've got on the screen right now, because a few years ago, I actually worked with one of the elevator manufacturers, and it was fascinating. I was chatting to one of the directors over coffee, and he said, Richard, there's a really frustrating new trend. It's costing us a fortune. He said, basically, people are pressing this door close button so frequently these days that they're wearing out, and we keep having to replace them. He said, whilst this is expensive and frustrating for us, the irony here, is that what people don't seem to realize is that over half of the door close buttons in the world are not connected to anything. It's just a light bulb. So the next time your finger is hovering over that button, my voice is going to be in your ear, reminding you that you are a sick individual. Because why is this so problematic? Well, I think all of us can probably remember what I'm going to call here the old world. We used to have something called work. Around it, we had something called commuting, and then we had this strange mythical creature called life. Do you remember life? Remember that thing we used to have years ago, when the boundaries between the compartments in our life were somewhat clearer than they are today, because the 2 universal symptoms of the pandemic are, number 1, brain fog, and number 2, fatigue. And so I want to argue we are losing a fundamental ability. And it's the ability to stop, to really stand back and think. And here we have Thomas Watson Sr., who founded IBM in 1914 and ran it into his retirement in 1956. And he famously had this word think put above his desk. And in his era, this was tough. But today, in our hurry sick, the live, virtual, hybrid, remote, whatever lives, this is becoming pretty much impossible. There's a wonderful phrase that originates in Florida that cuts to the heart of the issue. They say, when you're fighting off the alligators, it's hard to remember you were trying to drain the swamp. Genius. If our strategic objective is to drain the swamp, and here we have a Florida swamp, the problem is there are alligators there. And if an alligator attacks you, you kind of need to defend yourself. But here's the bad news. Okay, so this is the bad news. there is some good news at the end. A history of success, which all of you have, otherwise you would not be considering an MBA at London Business School, is no guarantee of future success, because the things that have ensured your success to date, this far in your career, are different than the things you will need as you get more senior. So as Marshall Goldsmith's book puts it, what got you here won't get you there. You don't have all the skills and abilities you need for the next phase and phases of your career, which is kind of why I would argue, and I'm biased, that actually tooling yourself up with an MBA, particularly at this critical phase when the whole nature of organizations and leadership is changing more than at certainly any time in my 22 years in academia, it's kind of not a bad idea. And so many of us, we're just feeling so pleased with how well we're doing in our career. Well, unfortunately, the fact we've been successful does not mean it's going to end very well, because you're never promoted because you were good at your last role. There is always a leap of faith, a hope that we're able to adapt to the challenges of a more senior role, and the challenges are different challenges. It's not just about getting more money, monkeys on your back, and working harder than before. It's completely different. And you might say, well, Richard, you're talking about losers here. I am a winner. This isn't going to happen to me because I'm very self-aware. Really? You sure you're self-aware? Because most managers think they're very aware, but they're not. As Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So what are the most consistent mistakes that executives make, particularly as they're transitioning into senior management? Here is a list. And the first of them is arrogance. Again, that lack of humility, as we talked about at the start of this. Always having to be the center of attention. It's all about me, rather than creating an environment where everyone feels they're the center of attention and they get that recognition we were talking about earlier. Unpredictable mood swings. That irritability that always takes a lot of other people's energy to understand what mood you're in and how to manage you. Excessive caution, paralyzed by fear. Untrusting, absolutely critical, being skeptical about the motivations of others. Aloof, you disengage, especially when the pressure is on, and the pressure has certainly been on every organization in the last couple of years. Destructively impulsive, always change your mind without considering the consequences. Overly political, you say one thing you can't set priorities, so lots of initiatives but never get implemented. Overly political, you say one thing and you do another. Perfectionist, you're too focused on the detail, constantly micromanaging, and you want to please everyone. So it's one of those dangerous things, is needing to be loved, because you can't make the difficult decisions. And so let me give you a little hypothetical scenario here. Oops, sorry. That's a hypothetical scenario here. It's this, that you ate something at breakfast today that tasted a bit strange, and right now you're feeling those stomach cramps and the sweats and the pain, and you know you've got serious food poisoning, and you slip into a coma, and you are in a coma for 3 months without any communication with the rest of the world. If that was going to happen to you, God forbid, then my question to you is this: would your organization collapse? And I'll help you with this. The answer is no. In fact, the scary thing is, in 3 months' time, you wake up out of your coma, rush back to the organization, door close button, and emerge there and say, okay, guys, crisis over, I'm back. How are they going to respond? Well, the scary thing is they say, actually, boss, it's kind of going okay. In fact, it's going slightly better than when you were here, micromanaging us. We love to feel indispensable. But as Charles de Gaulle famously said, the graveyards are full of indispensable men. This isn't what it means to be an effective manager. Because what it means to be an effective manager is you've got to learn a skill. which is what we call delegation. And this is against every fiber of your instincts, because the reason you've been successful is you're a high performer. So to delegate to somebody, well, they'll probably be less experienced, less senior, and possibly even less intelligent. They'll do it more slowly and maybe even not as well as you. So why should you intervene? Well, in the words of the great Alfred P. Sloan, who I would consider the father of modern management. He ran GM, General Motors, for many years. He said, the most important thing I learned about management is the work must be done by other men. This is not just another management skill. Your ability to delegate is absolutely fundamental to your ability to succeed in your career. And yet you're going to have to learn these skills. Almost nobody finds this instinctive. So how do we avoid derailment? Well, here is my final slide. Well, you need regular feedback on your leadership behavior. What are the things that have really led me to successful? Do you really know what your strengths are? And the answer is almost certainly no. And it's something we'll explore with you here, because strengths usually are only the things we hear at our funeral, where it's kind of too late to do anything about them when somebody's giving a eulogy. So figuring out what your strengths are as early as you can in your career is crucial, because the people who have the most successful careers are the ones who actually spend as much time as they can doing the things they love and are good at. But some of these strengths under that spotlight of senior management can start looking like weaknesses. You need to continue learning. Now, again, I'm biased, Brett's biased. We kind of think that doing an MBA is something that for many, not everyone, but for many people is going to tool you up to make sure that you can go into situations that today would be terrifying. You'd feel completely out of your depth. You wouldn't feel confident as well as technically competent. You'll be able to go after your MBA into a much wider range of situations and really be effective. So this is something that, again, it's a pretty simple calculation in terms of the economic value of doing an MBA, but it's not just formal learning. It's also that informal learning in the workplace. And I would certainly suggest that when you do your MBA, you're going to learn probably as much from your fellow MBA students as you are from the faculty. And this is a key distinction about why you need to go to the best damn school you can get into, because it's the quality of your fellow students that really make the biggest difference. Now, again, in really good schools, you're going to hopefully have not just professors who've written the books that they use in other schools, but you're also going to have people who are good teachers, we hope. But it's also the quality of the fellow students. It's just so critical. It's that interaction with these people that are from very, very different to you. And that's exactly the point. You need to get advice from a coach or a mentor. Clarify your personal vision of success. What does success really mean for me in my career? And finally, manage your relationship with your boss, because it's always more dangerous to underestimate your boss than overestimate your boss. So I hope that this is useful. And again, if you want to connect, please do, or drop me an email if you have any further questions. We only had an hour together here, and I wanted to share some stuff with you as well as hear your points of view. So good luck with your application. I hope you choose LBS. This for me was a transformative experience. This is a world-class school, and the probability of you regretting doing an MBA, particularly an executive MBA, is pretty slim. So good luck with that application. I hope to see you at LBS, but wherever you end up, whatever your choices are, good luck at making sure you avoid these predictable mistakes on the path to success. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. And I promise that I only checked one email during the course of that presentation. And the funny thing is, I think I've seen you speak about 20 times probably in the 13 years I've been at LBS, but I always learn something new. And I think kind of touching on your point that you made near the end there, that really is the beauty of our programs at LBS and you know, the faculty and how you interact with people in the class. It's far more about facilitating a wider conversation amongst those people in the room rather than just teaching. Yeah. That's an important part. Yeah.
Thanks.
So thanks again to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you got as much out of the presentation as I did. This doesn't necessarily have to be the end of the conversation, obviously. As Richard said, please do get in touch with him, get in touch with us as well. We're keenly anticipating your applications, but here at LBS in RNA, in recruitment admissions, we like to have conversations with people before the point of submission of applications. So please do continue that conversation with us. All the contact details are obviously available on the website, and there are other steps we can always take to make sure that you understand everything about the programs that you're interested in, and a little bit more about life at LBS. So thanks again to Richard. Thanks to everyone who's joined us, and we hope to hear from you soon.